The withdrawal notice arrived at the human outpost in the Valen corridor on Cycle 41. It was not addressed to anyone in particular. The Dravathi Empire did not bother with names when dealing with species they had already decided were finished. The message was short: 30 cycles to remove all personnel, vessels, and installations from the corridor. After that, anything human-made would be treated as debris. Fleet Commander Sarath read the confirmation report on the bridge of his cruiser and said nothing for a moment. Then he set it down and told his communications officer to log it as delivered. The humans had received the notice. That was all that mattered. The corridor had been contested for 11 years, and the Empire had been patient. Now the patience was done. His patrol formation, 3 cruisers moving in a slow arc through the central sector, had been doing this run for 6 years without incident. No human vessel had challenged them directly in 2 years. Sarath believed, without arrogance, simply as a matter of observed fact, that the humans had already accepted they could not hold this space. The notice was just paperwork now. His second officer asked if he expected any response. Sarath said no. He was not wrong about that exactly. There was no response. There was no transmission from any human vessel or installation in the corridor. Nothing moved. Nothing powered up. The sector was quiet the same way it had been quiet for weeks. What Sarath did not know, and had no way to know, was that the quiet was not emptiness. It was weight. Deep inside the debris field that stretched across the corridor's sensor shadow, something enormous was holding still. The field was old. A dead system scattered remains, rocks the size of small cities drifting in loose clusters. It was the worst place in the corridor for active scanning. Sensors bounced wrong in there, returns came back confused, and no Dravathi captain had ever seen a reason to push a ship through it when the open lanes were right there. The humans had noticed that 11 months ago. USCS Relentless had been dark for 19 days. No drive emissions, no active sensor pings, no heat signature above the background noise of the rocks around it. The ship was more than 2 kilometers long, and it was sitting inside that field like a held breath. Every non-essential system was off. The crew worked in low light, spoke in low voices not because they had to, but because the ship had that kind of feeling right now. Still, waiting. Admiral Rael Voss stood at the back of the bridge and watched the passive display. It showed the 3 Dravathi cruisers moving through their patrol arc on the far side of the corridor. Tiny signatures, easy to read. They were not hiding. They had no reason to. One of the junior sensor operators, a young man named Tavo, turned in his chair and said quietly that the cruisers had not changed course. Voss nodded once. Tavo asked if they were expecting more ships soon. Voss said yes. In about 8 cycles, the reinforcement fleet would arrive at the corridor's central relay station. 8 warships, possibly more. The Empire was done waiting, and they would send enough force to make the sweep look easy. Tavo asked what they were going to do. Voss looked at the display for a moment. The cruisers, the debris field, the long, dark corridor stretching out in every direction. He said, "Wait." Tavo turned back to his console. Commander Petra Sung was at her station on the far side of the bridge, running passive array checks for the 4th time that day. She did not look up. She had heard the exchange and did not need to add anything to it. She had spent 9 weeks building the targeting model for this operation. Every Dravathi patrol route, every known ship class in the reinforcement fleet, every relay station frequency, every fuel transfer window. She knew the formation the Empire would arrive in before they did. She had already decided what she was going to do about it. She just needed them to get here first. Chief Basu came up from the lower engineering decks and stood near the bridge entrance for a moment, wiping his hands on a cloth. He looked at the passive display, looked at Voss, and said the stealth envelope was holding clean. No leaks, no thermal drift above threshold. Voss thanked him. Basu nodded and went back down. The Relentless drifted. Rocks moved around it in their slow, ancient orbits. The 3 Dravathi cruisers completed their arc and began the return leg. In the corridor beyond, 6 human outposts were running on skeleton crews, making just enough noise to look occupied, just enough activity to look normal. They were not bait exactly, they were stage dressing. The real thing was already in position. Sarath's report, filed that evening to Grand Admiral Seth, said the corridor was quiet and the withdrawal notice had been delivered without incident. He described the human presence in the corridor as reduced and declining. He assessed the probability of organized resistance as low. He filed that report 19 days after the Relentless had already gone dark inside the debris field. The answer to the Empire's ultimatum had been in motion for 3 weeks before the ultimatum was ever sent. The reinforcement fleet did not arrive quietly. 8 Dravathi warships dropped out of transit in close formation, right on schedule, engines burning full as they decelerated toward the corridor's central relay station. They were loud the way powerful things are loud when they see no reason not to be. Active sensors sweeping in every direction. Identification beacons broadcasting. 2 of the ships were cruiser class and the other 6 were a mix of assault carriers and support vessels. Together, they massed more firepower than anything the humans had ever stationed in this corridor. They took up anchor positions around the relay station and began coordinating with Sarath's patrol formation. The plan was simple. In 4 cycles, once the rest of the withdrawal window closed, they would move through the corridor in a single formation and remove whatever the humans had left behind. The relay station crew calculated it would take 2 days. None of them looked at the debris field. It had no value. Nothing moved in it. There was no reason to spend scan time on a rock cluster when there were 6 human outposts making faint transmissions in the far sectors. Inside the Relentless, Petra Sung was very busy. She had the passive arrays running on a narrow-angle sweep, not enough to be detected, just enough to pull the thermal and electromagnetic signatures off each ship as it settled into position. The Dravathi were talkative when they felt safe. Every active beacon, every nav pulse, every engine-cooled-on signature told her something. She built a picture of the formation the way a careful person builds something that needs to last. One data point at a time. No assumptions. No shortcuts. By the time the fleet had been at anchor for 3 hours, she knew which ship was the command vessel. She knew which 2 ships were carrying the bulk of the fleet's fuel reserves. She knew the frequencies the relay station used to talk to the fleet, and she knew which of those frequencies was encrypted and which ones were not. She knew the patrol pattern the Empire would run during the anchor period. She turned in her chair and looked at Voss. She said, "They lined up for us, Admiral." Voss looked at her display for a moment without speaking. Then he asked how confident she was in the command ship identification. She said 91%. The signal patterns matched the class profile, and the formation deference was consistent. He nodded. He asked about the fuel ships. She said both were confirmed. They were staying close together on the far edge of the formation, away from the cruisers. Voss looked at the display a little longer. 8 ships, full formation, already planning. He told her to begin Phase 1. Petra turned back to her console and brought up the drone release interface. The Relentless carried 48 silent drones, small, dark, no active systems. They moved on trajectory burns only. Once released, they coasted, no propulsion signature, no heat, nothing to see. They were not fast. They were patient. She selected 2 clusters of 12 and set their trajectories. The math was not complicated. The Dravathi fleet was not moving. The drones had time. She ran the paths 3 times to be sure, then released both clusters through the low-pressure vents on the ship's underside. No sound. No vibration. The drones drifted out into the dark and the rocks and began their long, slow coast toward the formation. It would take 14 hours. Nobody on the Relentless slept much during those 14 hours, but nobody made a production of it either. Tavo kept the passive arrays clean and called out any formation changes. of which there were two minor, both within the drift margins Petra had already accounted for. She adjusted the drone trajectories twice with small correction burns that lasted less than a second each. The Dravathi did not detect them. Darrow Fane came up from the fighter bays in the middle of the waiting period and stood near Petra's station for a while. He was the wing lead for the Relentless's 72 fighters, and he had been doing equipment checks for the past 2 days straight. He looked at the formation on the passive display. He looked at the drone tracks. He did not ask questions. He had been briefed. He just wanted to see it with his own eyes for a moment. He told Petra it was a good spread. She said she knew. He went back down to the bays. Voss spent most of the 14 hours at the back of the bridge. He drank water. He read status reports. He did not pace. He had done things like this before, not exactly like this, but close enough that the waiting did not bother him. The waiting was the plan. The waiting was the weapon. When the drone position confirmation came back, all 24 drones inside the formation, holding station, undetected, Petra pulled up the detonation grid and walked Voss through the target assignments one more time. 4 ships flagged for primary disruption. 2 backup assignments if any of the primary runs failed. The fuel ships were not on the detonation list. She had other plans for them. Voss approved the grid. He told her to hold on his mark. She said, "Yes, Admiral." The Dravathi fleet sat at anchor around the relay station, engines cooling, crews rotating through rest cycles. Fleet Commander Sareth filed an updated report to Grand Admiral Seth. He said the corridor sweep would begin ahead of schedule. He said the humans had made no aggressive moves. He said the operation was proceeding exactly as planned. 24 drones drifted silently inside his formation. Nobody on any of his 8 ships had the faintest idea. Voss said, "Mark." All 24 drones fired at once. They were not explosive in the conventional sense. Each one carried a dense magnetic pulse core that, when triggered, released a directional electromagnetic burst powerful enough to fry every unshielded drive component within 40 meters. The Dravathi ships were not shielded against this. There was no reason to shield against it. Nobody had ever deployed weapons like this in a fleet action before. The pulse was not a known combat technique. It was not in any Dravathi tactical database. 4 warships lost engine function in the same second. The effect was immediate and total. No warning, no buildup. One moment the ships were at anchor, engines idling, crews going about their rotations. The next moment every drive system on 4 separate vessels simply stopped. Emergency lighting kicked on. Backup systems tried to initialize and found nothing to connect to. Captains started shouting for damage reports, and the damage reports made no sense because there was no visible damage, no hull breaches, no fires, no projectile impacts. The engines were just gone. Then the jamming hit. Every communications frequency in the formation went static. Fleet-to-fleet channels, the relay station link, emergency bands, all of it buried under a dense noise field that the Relentless had been holding ready for exactly this moment. The 8 ships were suddenly 8 separate problems, unable to talk to each other, unable to reach the relay station, unable to call for help. On Sareth's bridge, the first reports came in fast and made no sense at all. He stood at his command station and listened to his officers try to explain what had happened. No projectiles had been detected. No ships had appeared on sensors. Nothing had fired. There were no drive signatures, no targeting locks, no energy weapons discharge, nothing on any sensor that explained why 4 of his ships had just gone dark. His tactical officer said it could be a sensor error. Sareth said 4 simultaneous engine failures were not a sensor error. His communications officer said all external channels were down. Sareth told him to keep trying. For 6 minutes, nobody on any of the 8 ships could explain what had happened. 6 minutes of running every diagnostic, pulling every scan log, cross-referencing every passive reading from the past 24 hours. 6 minutes of Dravathi officers who were trained, experienced, and genuinely skilled at their work, coming up completely empty. Then the Relentless turned on. Not all of it, just the stealth suppression field. Petra pulled the stealth field down for exactly 87 seconds, and the passive displays across every ship in the corridor lit up with a single return: massive, close, wrong in every possible way. A ship signature that was larger than anything in the Dravathi fleet registry. A ship that had been sitting inside the debris field for 19 days without emitting a single detectable particle. Sareth stared at the return on his display. His tactical officer said he did not recognize the class. Nobody recognized the class. The Relentless opened its flight deck doors, and Darrow Fane led his wing out at full burn. 72 fighters came out of the debris field in 2 tight groups, running dark until they cleared the rocks, then lighting drives simultaneously and hitting combat velocity inside 8 seconds. They were already inside sensor range of the fleet before the Dravathi could process what the carrier return had meant. By the time anyone on the 8 ships had a targeting solution worth anything, the fighters were inside minimum engagement distance for the warship's main batteries. Sareth ordered point defense systems active. His point defense gunners did their jobs. They were good. They got kills. But 72 fighters at close range, coming from multiple vectors with no warning, were not a problem that point defense was designed to handle. Point defense was designed for missiles and drones at distance. These were crude fighters moving at angles that required the guns to track faster than the targeting systems could compute. Darrow's wing hit the 2 nearest cruisers with their first pass, not trying to destroy them, trying to blind them. Sensor arrays, communications nodes, external antenna clusters, small, fast, precise strikes that turned capable warships into confused ones. Then the Relentless disappeared again. 87 seconds after it had appeared, the stealth field came back on, and the enormous carrier signature vanished from every display in the formation. Sareth's tactical officer called out the loss of contact, and there was nothing to say in response to it. It had been there. Now it was not. They had no targeting data worth using because 87 seconds was not long enough to build a solution against a contact that size. The fighters were still among them. Sareth grabbed his console with both hands and tried to turn the chaos into something he could work with. He had 4 dead ships, full jamming, 72 hostile fighters in his formation, and a carrier-class vessel of unknown type that had just proven it could appear and disappear at will. He had been in combat for 30 years. He had never been in anything like this. He told his tactical officer to find that carrier. His tactical officer said he could not. There was nothing on sensors. The fighters made their second pass. 2 of Sareth's warships were gone within the first 15 minutes. Not destroyed in the traditional sense. The fighters had not tried to crack them open. They had gone after drive cores, reactor cooling lines, and weapon systems in a sequence so methodical it felt planned down to the individual component. Because it was. Petra had spent weeks building a kill priority list for every known Dravathi ship class in this formation. Darrow's pilots had memorized it. They were not flying by instinct. They were executing a diagram. The 2 ships tumbled away from the formation, unpowered, leaking atmosphere in thin streams. 2 more were badly hurt. The remaining 4 were still functional but operating without communications and with degraded sensor capability from the first pass strikes on their arrays. Sareth was doing the counting. He had 8 ships when this started. Now he had 4 that could fight and 4 that could not. He had no contact with the carrier. He had no contact with the relay station. He had no way to reach Grand Admiral Seth. His fighters had managed to down 6 of the human craft, which was something, but 66 were still active and hitting him in rotation, one group attacking while the other turned for another pass. They were not in a hurry. That was the thing that stuck with him. They were not fighting desperately. They were managing him. He ordered his 4 functional ships to pull toward the relay station and regroup. If he could get to the station, He could use its communications array to reach Seth, and he could set up a defensive position with the station's point defense grid backing him. It was a reasonable order. It was the correct tactical response. That was when his analyst Yevha spoke up. She had said almost nothing since the attack started. She had been at her console the entire time, not running tactical overlays or damage assessments. She had been pulling passive scan logs. Everything the ship's arrays had recorded over the past 72 hours, frame by frame, looking for something she could not name yet but felt should be there. She found it at the 46-hour mark. A thermal trace, faint enough that the automated system had flagged it as probable rock mass and moved on. But it was not a rock mass. The shape was wrong. It was too regular, too consistent, distributed the way a cooling system distributed heat across a hull rather than the way rock distributed solar absorption. And it was large, larger than anything in the Empire's fleet registry. She cross-referenced it against the sensor return from those 87 seconds when the carrier had been visible, and the profiles matched within acceptable margin. She said, "Fleet Commander, the carrier was in the debris field. It was there before we arrived, before the withdrawal notice was even sent." Zoreth stopped. He turned from the tactical display and looked at her. She said the thermal trace was 46 hours old. The withdrawal notice had been delivered 31 cycles ago. The carrier had been in position before the notice was transmitted. The room was quiet for a moment. Zoreth's second officer started to say something about how that was not possible, how no crew could hold a ship that dark for that long, how the Dravathi sensor net would have picked up something over 19 days. He stopped talking because Zoreth held up one hand and the room understood the gesture. Zoreth thought about the withdrawal notice. He had read it as a human response to pressure, a species that had already lost accepting the formal end of the dispute. He thought about how a human admiral would read that same notice, not as a surrender, but as a window. 30 cycles of normal Dravathi behavior, standard patrol routes, predictable formation positions, no reason for the Empire to change anything or look anywhere new. While a carrier the size of a city sat dark in a debris field, and a tactical officer mapped every ship in the incoming fleet. The notice had not been compliance. It had been preparation time. He turned back to the tactical display and looked at the path to the relay station. His 4 ships were already starting to move toward it. It was the right move. It was what any trained Dravathi officer would do. He thought about what the human carrier's commander would know, about what a trained Dravathi officer would do. He told his navigation officer to hold position. His navigation officer looked at him. Zoreth said, "Do not move toward the relay station." 2 seconds later, USCS Relentless appeared on sensors directly between his formation and the relay station. Not 87 seconds this time. Just there, fully visible, holding position across the only open lane that led back to safety, main batteries live, fighter wings still active on the flanks. It had been there before he gave the order to move. The humans had not been reacting to his decisions. They had been ready for them before he made them. Yevha looked at the carrier return on her display and said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. Zoreth gripped the edge of his console and looked at the shape of the thing blocking his path and understood, with complete clarity, that this had never been a battle he was in a position to win. The Relentless held its position and did not fire. That was the thing Zoreth could not immediately process. A ship that size, with his 4 remaining vessels sitting exposed at close range, and it was just holding. Main batteries live but not tracking. Fighters cycling back into defensive orbits around the carrier rather than pushing another attack run. The jamming dropped off all frequencies at once, and external communications came back fully and without conditions. Then a single transmission arrived. No voice, no image, just navigational data. One route, A straight line out of the corridor, away from every human installation, away from every outpost, leading back through the transit point nearest Dravathi space. Nothing else. No demands, no instructions, no deadline given, just coordinates sitting there on the channel waiting. Sorath stared at it. His communications officer said the channel was still open. He said the human ship had not transmitted anything else. Sorath asked if there were any other signals, any encrypted traffic, any secondary message buried in the data package. His officer ran the check and said no. The navigational data was exactly what it appeared to be, a way out. 3 of his captains made their decision before Sorath said a word. The first ship moved toward the exit vector 6 seconds after the transmission. The second followed before the first had fully committed to the heading. The third waited almost 2 minutes, which Sorath could tell was the captain working through the same calculations he was working through, and then took the vector without a word on any channel. No explanation, no communication to Sorath, just gone. Sorath watched them go on the display. He did not blame them. He had 4 ships that could still move and a carrier sitting on the only strategic position that mattered. His fighters were spent. His communications to Seth were back, but he had not opened that channel yet because he was not ready to say the words that would have to be said on it. He was a fleet commander with 30 years of service who had walked into a corridor that had already been taken before he arrived, and the enemy had waited politely for him to figure that out. He was angry, not at the humans, not exactly, at the shape of it, at how clean it was. Yevha said his name quietly. He looked at her. She had the corridor map on her secondary display. She showed him the current position of every Dravathi asset in the Valen corridor, not just his formation but the patrol units, the logistics ships, the observation posts. If the carrier had been in position for 19 days, it had been watching all of it. It knew the corridor better than his own fleet charts. He opened the channel to Grand Admiral Seth. Seth had been watching on long-range relay. He had the broad shape of what had happened but not the detail. He listened while Sorath gave it to him in short, flat sentences. The carrier, the drones, the jamming, the way the exit vector had appeared without a word attached to it, the way 3 of his captains had already taken it. Seth was quiet for a moment after Sorath finished. Then he asked what Sorath's assessment was. Sorath said, "We cannot hold this position, Admiral. We cannot take the relay station with what remains. The human carrier is undamaged. Our fighter complement is gone. If we attempt to fight through to the station, we lose the rest of the ships." Seth asked about the carrier's capabilities. He asked whether it could be tracked, destroyed, flanked with fresh forces. Sorath said he did not know where the carrier would be if they tried to bring fresh forces in. He said that was the problem. He said it had been in that debris field for 19 days without being detected, and if it went dark again, they would be starting over, and it would not make the same positioning mistake twice. He said there was no positioning mistake the first time. Seth was quiet again, a long quiet this time. Then he said, "Withdraw, full corridor withdrawal, all units." Sorath acknowledged the order. He opened the fleet channel and broadcast the withdrawal order to every Dravathi unit in the Valen corridor. He gave clear instructions on route and formation. He did not explain the reason. They could read the tactical situation from their own displays. He looked at the Relentless one more time on the sensor display before he moved. It had not changed position. It had not powered up its main batteries. It had not done anything except sit there on the exit vector like a door held open by someone who had already decided what was going to happen and was simply waiting for the last part of it to finish. Sorath took the exit vector. He was the last ship out of the corridor. Voss watched Sorath's ship clear the corridor transit point on the long-range passive array. The return disappeared into the jump signature, and then there was nothing. The corridor was empty of Dravathi signatures for the first time in 6 years. He looked at the display for a moment, then he looked at Petra. She was already at the stealth interface. She ran the pre-dark checklist the same way she had run it 19 days ago when they had first gone dark in the debris field. Methodically. No rush. Every system confirmed in sequence. When she reached the end of the list, she looked at Voss and gave a small nod. He told her to take them dark. The stealth field came up and the relentless stopped existing, as far as the rest of the universe was concerned. No emissions. No heat signature above background. The fighter wing had already recovered aboard and the flight deck was sealed. The main batteries powered down. The ship became a dark shape in dark space and began drifting back into the debris field, back into the same position it had held for the past 19 days. Tavo, at the sensor station, confirmed the stealth envelope was holding clean. Nobody said anything for a while after that. Darrow came up from the fighter bays about an hour later. He had a graze on his left forearm from a piece of debris that had come through a cockpit panel during the second attack run. He had wrapped it himself and not mentioned it until now. He stood near the bridge entrance and looked at the dark displays and said the wing had done good work. He did not say it like someone wanting recognition. He said it the way a person closes a report. Voss agreed that they had. Darrow looked at the passive display, which showed nothing because there was nothing to show. He asked if there was a next assignment. Voss told him to get some sleep. Darrow went back down. Chief Basu came up from engineering with 2 cups of something that smelled like it had been sitting on a warming plate for too long. He handed one to Voss without asking. Voss took it. Basu stood there and looked at the corridor layout on the main display and said the stealth field had run clean the whole time, not one leak, and he wanted it noted in the log that the system had performed above spec. Voss said it would be noted. Basu finished his cup and went back to his decks. Petra pulled up the after-action data and started building the incident report. It was detailed work. Drone deployment, strike sequence, jamming windows, fighter sorties, carrier exposure duration, enemy response timeline. She went through it carefully because the data mattered and because it gave her hands something to do. She had been running on very little sleep for 3 days and she was starting to feel it now that the tension had come off. She found a small error in one of the drone trajectory logs, a correction burn that had been recorded at the wrong timestamp. She fixed it. She kept going. Voss read his own version of the summary on his personal display. 6 Dravathi ships destroyed or permanently disabled. 4 escaped with damage. 4 reached the exit vector undamaged. The corridor was cleared without the relentless firing a single main battery round. Total fighter losses, 8. All pilots confirmed recovered or accounted for. He set the summary down. On the far side of the corridor, Grand Admiral Seth was writing his own report. He wrote it carefully because he was a careful man, and because the High Council would want an explanation, and the explanation was going to be difficult to give. He wrote about the carrier. He wrote about the drone attack and the jamming and the stealth capability. He wrote about the exit vector offered without conditions and what that said about the human commander's intent. He described the carrier's dimension, as best as his ship's sensors had recorded in 87 seconds of exposure. He wrote the ship's last known status, undetected, position unknown, presumed still operating in the Valen corridor. His final line, we do not know where it went. He read it back, he sent it. Inside the debris field, USCS Relentless drifted in silence. The rocks moved around it in their slow orbits, the same way they had moved for 1,000 years before the ship arrived and would move for 1,000 years after it was gone. The corridor was human-held. The relay station would receive a small human engineering crew within the week. The outposts that had been running on skeleton crews went back to normal operations. Nobody outside the Relentless's hull knew where it was. Voss sat in the quiet bridge and finished the cup that Basu had brought him. It was not good. It was warm and it was there and that was enough. Petra was still working on her report, her face lit by the glow of her console in the otherwise dark bridge. Tavo had fallen asleep at his station. Voss decided to leave him. He looked at the passive display. Empty corridor, clean sweep. The debris field moving around them the same as always, patient and indifferent. He turned off his display and sat in the dark and let the ship drift.